Wow, product-led growth really seems to be the most popular track in Sigsum. Like that was crazy. People were standing. We expected typically like a even split, but I think clearly people really care about growth in this day and age. So with that in mind, our second track, second speaker is here, Sriram Sridharan, who leads growth engineering at Postman. He's going to talk about how traditional product-led growth playbooks are changing with Gen AI. Over to you, Sriram. Like, can we have a round of applause for our speaker?
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. I'm excited to be here. And before I even get started, I wanted to make sure that I have the right expectations here. I'm definitely not here to talk about how I use all the AI tools that are out there to basically like rebuild our growth stack. I don't think that'll be impressive, and that's not what I plan to do here. I truly believe that generative AI is actually a game changer when you adopt it to your product and actually make your product to be AI native. And that's kind of what we've been doing at Postman. So as part of this talk, I'm going to use Postman as the case study and talk about what we've done in the past for growth and walk you through some of the pros and cons, what's worked, what didn't work, and then talk about what AI is doing for us and what we've done, the kind of bets we've taken to make Postman a truly product-led growth company and like kind of supercharge our growth with our customers. So that's basically the theme of the talk here. Just so I make sure I set the right expectations here. And again, before we jump into talking about AI, quickly about myself, tagging onto the introduction, I lead growth engineering at Postman. I've been in the company for about 10 months now. And before that, I led growth with Open Door, which is a prop tech company in real estate. Spent about 5.5 years there. So mostly been in the function of growth. I also run a growth engineering course on Maven, which I hosted this year actually with a fellow friend of mine from, I forgot the name. Anyway, a fellow friend of mine. So check it out if you're interested in that. Coinbase, sorry. Yes, finally. And as I said, let's talk about Postman first because I'm going to talk about everything AI with Postman. So it's important that you all understand what Postman does. How many here know what Postman is, have used Postman in the past? Okay, great. I'm not surprised. Postman is a very loved developer product. It's been around for over 10 years now. More than 40 million users are on the platform, and about 4 million users are weekly active with Postman. Postman's most famous product is their API client. Actually, Dustin, who is here, he leads API clients. If you all have any feedback for why Postman can be better, you can talk to him. But it was the first mover in the space, and 98% of all Fortune 500 companies use Postman. Let's also quickly talk about the Postman funnel. As I said, Postman has a pretty big PLG makeup. It's about 40% of, more than 40% of the company's overall revenue. And it has a very, very strong top of funnel. And most of it is organic, which is amazing. Most companies spend millions of dollars in marketing. Postman hardly spends anything. It gets about 150,000 signups per week. So it's like very, very well known. And we define activation at Postman. Let's talk about activation. And I have the funnel here. This is not uncommon. Most growth companies, especially that's PLG, starts with acquisition, and then you have activation, retention, and then revenue, and then you have the expansion, which is actually getting more users into the funnel. So with Postman, the way we define activation is anyone who comes to Postman to send a request and get a 200 OK is considered to be an activated customer. And then these users then save these requests into collections. Collections are basically the collaborative assets within Postman. Without collections, there's no concept of teams. There's no concept of bringing in more users and whatnot. So that makes a activated customer. It generally takes a long time for a customer to be activated within Postman. Anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks for a customer to go all the way through the funnel and actually end up being a monetized customer. So as you know, it's a long game to get a customer from actually signing up to actually pay for the product. So this is an important slide because this is going to surface back towards the end. So this is basically how a customer who signs up for Postman, where do they end up 60 days later, the cohort of customers. As you can see, 75% of customers actually end up sending at least one request. Without this, Postman is pretty much useless. I don't know what the rest of the 25% actually even do. 54% of those users actually create a collection, which I said is an important asset in Postman. 17% create an environment, which is an important code feature to be activated. 80% of our paid customers actually have an environment created. So it's important for Postman to have users create an environment. And only 6% of these customers eventually collaborate, meaning share collections, share workspaces, form teams, and at Postman, the first 3 users are free. When you invite your 4th customer is when you actually enter into a paid a trial, which is basically a free version of our paid product. So it's very important to drive collaboration. And that eventually results in trials, and that's how we make money. So clearly in 60 days, there's only 6% of folks who actually end up collaborating, which is not great. And it takes as I said, the cycle of PLG is pretty long here. Sorry, my mouth is drying up. I don't know if you have water here. I'm just going to quickly grab water. Give me a second. I'll just take one. Wow, I can finally talk. Okay, this is much better. So let's talk about the growth challenges. Why does it take 60 days to actually get these customers through the funnel to get them to pay? And this is, by the way, not uncommon in most SaaS companies. Everyone faces this problem. Feature discovery is the first problem. Postman is very feature rich. We have plenty of really interesting features that we offer to the customer in order to set up their workflow and go deep into the funnel. But those features, as you saw, creating an environment is a very simple one. If you want to test your API, and if you want to test your API across development, stage, production, you don't want to be repeating your API request. So it's very simple, and even that only gets about 17% adoption in a 60-day period. And because of that, again, customers using core features, they don't go beyond the first few core features. And the first few core features will get you only 10% into solving your problem. So what does that mean? A lot of customers end up with shallow use cases and stick there with Postman for 10 years only using Postman with those shallow features. And we want them to actually go deeper into the workflow so that we can truly solve problems beyond just testing your API. And because of these lack of deeper workflows, there is less of an opportunity to collaborate. What are you doing if the only thing that you have in Postman is requests? And sharing a request is not as important as sharing a collection with environments, with documentation. We want to make customers use Postman as the source of truth for all of their APIs within their company. So anyone who wants to understand what API somebody wants to use, they should come to Postman. They should discover their APIs there, run those APIs, see examples, test it out, play with it. That is the true use of Postman. But companies, teams hardly get there. And because of this, we obviously have a low volume of high intent teams going into a trial. And as a result, we have lower monetization. Although we have a pretty large user base, our monetizable base is still a thin slice of that. And the fundamental reason why all of this is a challenge is because you do have to do a lot of manual work to get there. You have to spend time in Postman. You have to understand these features. You want to bring your API. You want to actually handcraft your collections, create these environments. It's a lot of work, and it's a big learning curve. And this is why, by the way, growth teams exist, is to basically drive adoption for these features. That's why I have a job. And there are very known, established playbooks on how you actually do this. And some of these are, and in this screenshot, I have a particular example of how we drove adoption for creating a variable and an environment in the product. And so let's go over some of them. the first thing that anyone thinks about when it comes to adoption and driving adoption of features is to reduce friction. Remove the number of steps, make the button really obvious, make it like a one-click action for the user. Those are like the obvious ones. And then you have contextual nudges. You want to basically catch the customer when they're doing something and let them know that they can do this better if they adopted something. So in this particular screenshot, you would see this nudge where this customer who runs a API request, the same API request, or rather a couple of requests with the same URL twice, we basically highlight that URL and say, hey, don't repeat yourself, save this as an environment and make it one button click, which had a really amazing conversion. We got a 10% win here. Everyone's celebrating, amazing. And besides that, we also have good documentation. A lot of customers actually start with, writing their search queries in Google, and Postman has fantastic documentation to get them right into the solution. And similarly, we also have a large developer community, and people are pretty active there. People help each other. We also have great developer relation specialists within the company who drive education through all of these things. And then tooltips, yada, yada. There's like a bunch of things that happen in product, all towards powering one core feature adoption. And we have to do this for, 10 other core features. Clearly, that's going to take time. And independent of all of this, like while you do all of this, it's still upon the user to remember, create habits, and then make sure that they repeat those habits so that they become the champion of those features within the product, and then teach others. Clearly, a lot of work on the customer, a lot of bandwidth for them. And also, like when it comes to SaaS products, especially like Postman, we don't want them to spend a lot of time on Postman. We want them to actually spend time solving their problem, but we want them to use Postman for that. That's the idea here. So yes, these playbooks work, but clearly they don't scale. It takes a long time. Even though we get a 10% result on this, it's still not going to make a big dent when it comes to actually driving people in the funnel, because there's a lot more features that they need to adopt in order to move down the funnel. So let's finally talk about generative AI here. So when generative AI, LLMs came out, when ChatGPT came out, one thing that it did really well that I think all of us were really excited to use is it gave us solutions really quickly. We posted a problem previously on Google. We would get 10 links. We'll have to comb through them, read through them, understand, and then we have to basically pick and build our own steps to then go and implement it in the product. When tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity came into picture, they gave you solutions, step-by-step guided solutions of how you would go about creating an environment. Yes, this reduced the cognitive load for customers. It did help users understand the product a lot faster, but it still doesn't solve the problem that the user has to go and do stuff. They still have to remember, they still have to create habits. Habit building is hard. So this is where, when LLMs kind of gave birth to agents, things changed dramatically. The power of agents, as most of you probably have used some products here that use agents, I'm guessing, you all know that certain things that the agent does really well is very powerful. For example, it's fundamentally changing the way software is built. Software is it's no longer a static software product. You have proactive behaviors kind of built into the product. You have agents actually collaborating with you in the product. They dramatically reduce the time to adoption, time to value. What a user or a customer is able to do in a week, an agent can do it in less than 2 minutes. They significantly reduce the cognitive load here, and of course, with more usage, an agent gets better. Just like us humans, the more we use the product, we get better at using it. Agents are going to do it probably 100x faster because they have infinite memory capacity, isn't it? So what did we do? So this is where at Postman, we realized, okay, we have a massive adoption problem. We need to drive our core features, and that's not going to happen with just running like optimization experiments on top of our product. We decided to adopt agents and make Postman fully agentic as a tool. So now, We don't care about users building habits for using core features. The only habit we want them to build is actually use agents. So what did we do? We started with actually onboarding our customers to this fully agentic product. Postman now has a chat-like feature that is very similar to what you would have seen in Cursor and other tools, Lovable, where you have an army of agents waiting to do the job for you. All you have to do is frame the right question, be as specific as possible, so that the agent can fully understand and build solutions for you, not just suggest them. So we recently launched a full end-to-end flow where a customer who now signs up for Postman is actually not just giving us information in the form of like who they are, but actually are dictating the problem. They're describing what they are here for. They're giving us more context, like their code base, like their API spec files, and they're specifically telling us this is what I want to achieve. And when they land on Postman now, they don't land on an empty workspace. They actually land with conversational build mode as the default mode, where the prompt the user gave us at onboarding is actually sent to the agent by default. The agent starts working on the problem right from the set-go. And so what happened? By the way, this is something we launched a little over a month back, so we're still new here, we're still learning. We're still scrappy, we're iterating rapidly. But then we started looking at the data. So if you remember the numbers that I showed a few slides back were for 60 days. This is just for 1 day. What's happened with agents is two things are collapsing. One, the adoption of our core features is shrinking. The time to adoption of our core features is shrinking, as well as the percentage of adoption is actually increasing. So with 1 day, we now have more customers actually creating collections and sending requests. We have a lot more customers actually creating environments, and all of these requests actually have tests attached with them. And all of this is performed by the agent. So this is when the user are actually interacting with an agent, and we've seen several examples of how a single user in a single session with an agent with probably 30 or 40 conversational back and forth have ended up with a full end-to-end solution and go back with a successful response. So I want to...
This is the new onboarding flow for Postman. Let's get started.
So before I show you guys the demo, so this is a demo of an end-to-end workflow that I recorded for this session. This was recorded a week and a half back. If you go to Postman now, you would see this is completely changed again. That's how quickly we're iterating over this product. It's getting better and better every day. Our agents are getting better. We provide a lot of tools to the agents as APIs. I mean, we are an API company trying to help other people build APIs. So we better have our API straight. And we did. We have hundreds of APIs fed to the agent as tools. We feed agents the right context. Each agent has a system prompt that is like carefully created to respond to the customer with specific solutions and not generic responses or recommendations. So with that, I will play this.
First, we ask for a name, what your role is. The next screen, we have our paid plans. You can set up your team, invite members to your team as you get started, or you can just simply continue. Now we have this prompt screen where you can actually enter your prompt of what you want to do. So in this particular case, you can choose a suggestion or you can type in yours. So let's try to type in, I would like to build the backend APIs for a to-do list application. And let's go. Now with the new Postman experience, you have an agent. There's an onboarding agent that gets kickstarted. It sends the user prompt. It automatically gets started here. As you can see, the agent is asking some questions to clarify. What are my features for these endpoints? Would it like to create a collection? for me in this workspace, or want me to go through a guided step-by-step process to build and test these endpoints. So let's go ahead and say I would like to have all the features that's described and create collections. So let's see what happens here. So the agent is trying to create a collection. So let's say approved. So it created the collections with a bunch of requests here. To create it, to get to-do list, update, and delete, as you can see. And then the agent now gives next steps. You can add request details, set up test scripts and examples. Let's do this. Let's add example for create to-do API. Okay, so it's basically creating that. Let's approve. You now have an example that is created that basically tests what the API is. Great. Now let's go one step further. Can you also add documentation for this API on the workspace? Would you like the work? So let's say yes. Okay, let's approve. Right, let's go back here. Let's go to documentation. There you go. Now you have a documentation for all of these things, and a documentation particularly in Create To Do that actually has the example that we added. Fantastic.
What you saw, can you guys hear me? Good, okay. What you saw right now was an example where in 3 minutes, I was able to go from nothing to actually having an API for my application with examples created, documentation created, with the documentation including the example that I had, which would have taken a typical customer without this months probably, if not weeks at least. And that is the power of agents. Now, I don't have to think or worry about driving adoption for each and every feature within Postman. I basically have only one problem right now, which is like, how do I drive adoption of users using agents, and how do I make these agents better? And that is the true power of agents. That is the true power of how PLG can be supercharged. So we have some learnings here. Again, these are early learnings. As I said, our UX and everything is like evolving. We are in like rapid iteration. So all of the polishes and everything else to do with the product is coming and will come further. But the main key learnings here are a lot of users actually arrive with good intents. This is not the majority. Again, I don't want to paste the rosy picture, but a reasonable amount of users are actually coming with like interesting problems to solve. So now we're actually focusing on the right problem, which is how can we help you? What can we solve for you? Agents are driving deeper engagement, as you saw in a single session. If the user comes with the right intent, they can actually solve their entire problem and move on, which is what we want them to do. We want them to use the product to solve their problem. We don't want them to stay in the product forever. That is not the purpose of Postman. And customers do value the use of agents, especially when the agent is actually able to give them specific solutions to solve their problems. So customers are building trust. We're seeing that those customers who had back and forth conversations with the agent, they actually have a high retention. They're coming back and they are having more interactions with the agents. And we no longer have shallow product tours. There's no, you land on a workspace and we have this like 5 different pop-ups that tell you where each of these different features are. That is no longer required. We don't even want you to care about where environments are located or any of these things. All we care for is for you to be able to execute what is important for you, get the answers for that, and move on. Now, that said, obviously, agents are only as intelligent as you make them. That involves two things. You need to feed them with the right tools. You need to give them the right context, and you need to have the right prompt. So without these, or without any, even if one of these things are not clear to the agent, they are not going to do a great job. And users are going to quickly lose trust. So a lot of what we are doing right now is actually reshaping our onboarding flow to get all the context that we can get from the customer so that we can give them the best experience. And as I mentioned, we no longer care for the adoption of features. We care for the adoption of agents, because agents are here to solve your problems and solve the problem for Postman for a deeper adoption. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sriram. I loved seeing all the real-world data in there as well. We have a few minutes before the session concludes, so maybe if we can take one question, if that's okay, whoever has the most pressing question for Sriram. I'm sure that'll be... Okay, I see a hand go up already.
So you shared sort of the successes, if you will. I think anybody working on getting agentic systems up and working has probably come across a lot of the things that don't go right. Can you talk about one of those, maybe the most prominent one, and kind of the climb to something successful after that?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of the question. So
how you sort of took something that wasn't working from agentic, right? You probably called an OpenAI API, didn't work the first time, didn't work the second time, put guardrails on it, iterated. Can you talk about that process?
yeah, I think the process of us building the onboarding agent was pretty interesting. Because when we first started to build the onboarding agent, our goal was how can we get the users see the best first possible response? Because most people who come in who all of a sudden see this agent typing in stuff, if that is not meaningful, then they're going to leave. And something that we had to do very specifically is we had to work on the onboarding side to get the most accurate prompt possible, or rather the most intentional prompt possible. And then on the other side, when we were catering the agent, we wanted to make sure that for each of these different intents, we started classifying what the most common intents are. And then we basically had system prompts that were very specific in terms of how we wanted the agent to actually guide them through. So this is a good example, or a happy path, where the user is very, very specific about I want to build an application, this is what I want to do. And a to-do list application is not uncommon. And most agents understand these things. But if a user, let's say a user comes in and says, I want to build an API. And it's very generic. And the agent can't do much. And they're not giving any context. Let's say they don't have a code base, they don't have a product spec file or something like that. In those cases, the agent can really go off the track and say, okay, I'm going to pull an API from, we also have a war chest of public APIs called Public API Network that we have. Many times the agent would just go off rails, pull those APIs and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do for you, which is not what we want to do. In those cases, we wanted the agent to actually probe the user to get the context so that it only performs the action when it has confidence that it can do something meaningful. So those are some cases where we had to refine, iterate, make sure that we don't fall off the rails. And again, we see these kinds of use cases every now and then. We have millions of users, and users are very creative about how they can break a system. So we constantly learn and iterate over their feedback. That's one example of how the agent would go pretty random, and that was completely worthless.
Nice. That was a great question.